Hello, everyone. This is Betsy Wurzel, your host of Chatting with Betsy on Pastor Oil Talk Radio Network, a subsidiary of Global Media Network, LLC. Our mantra is to educate, enlighten, and entertain. The views of the guests may not represent those of the host of the station. Folks, I'm excited every time I do a show, but I am super excited to have with me today a lovely young woman. To me, she's young. She's younger than my son. Ann Hand, who was born in 1985 in New York and currently divides her time between Massachusetts and Mexico City. She holds a Bachelor of Science degree from McGill University and a Master of Education degree from Harvard University. She has spent her career blending research, policy, and practice to create social impact in the Americas and beyond. A recognized expert in global education and development, she has frequently published on topics related to technology and society. And she wrote her first book that is on fire. It is Austrian Again, Reclaiming a Lost Legacy. Let me tell you, folks, I absolutely love this book. It is a great book. I think everyone, I know everyone can relate to this book. It is going to be holiday time. Buy this book for the history lover in your family. Buy it as a gift. It is a phenomenal book. And I want to welcome Ann Hand to Chatting with Betsy. Welcome, Ann.
Hi, Betsy. It's so exciting to be here, and thank you so much, and thank you for everybody listening.
Oh, you are welcome, and my pleasure. And your book really touched me and on so many levels, and I think we have a lot in common. But what I always ask my authors before I get into that is what motivated you to write this wonderful book? And congratulations.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's a great question. So initially, I was reading the news one day. This was sort of during the beginning of the pandemic, maybe a few months in. And I read this headline that Austria was going to begin to grant restoration citizenship for people whose families had fled during or at the beginning of or sort of during the process of World War II. And I was kind of like, because, I knew that we had some family history that was related to that time period. I didn't know much about it. And it just kind of seemed like, this would be interesting to pursue. It would be interesting to learn more. It would be interesting to just kind of see where it goes. So I started to do that, and I think a lot of us, we have these boxes, shoe boxes, banker's boxes, whatever they are, that were passed down from a grandparent or a great aunt or a great uncle, something like that. And they've just got all this family stuff in it that we don't really know that much about. So that was the first place I went. And as I, tried to understand the things in the box, tried to really understand a little bit more about my own family, these things that people had saved and why and all that. And as I tried to relate it to this process of potentially qualifying to gain Austrian citizenship, I really started to learn a lot more, both about this one particular part of my family history, but also about, the circumstances in which they left, this huge extended family that unfortunately had to stay in Europe. They weren't able to leave, and they all kind of disappeared, and we could only assume that they were murdered during World War II and the Holocaust. And a lot of it was just a lot to wrap my head around. And so that's kind of why I started writing the story, just for myself, right, to kind of process what was going on. And then after, a few more months, and I got further along in the process, and I was like, what I'm doing is something really unique and something very different. It's not every day that a country says, hey, we're going to open the doors to people whose ancestors were persecuted, 80, 90 years ago. And I thought it was worth it to try to make something a little bit more public of the story and what I'd been wrestling with I never saw anything, I never read anything about this. I never saw any books published about, stories like mine. I never saw my family represented in what I did know about, World War II and kind of how things went down with all that. And I just thought it was really important, to get to a point to put the story out there, and hope that people would relate. And it really sounds like you relate to it, Betsy, and I really appreciate that.
Oh, I definitely did. I was reading your book, and I'm thinking of my own family. My father's side, who came from the Austria-Hungary Empire. And because of your book, I know why my maiden name sounds German, because I had to take German-sounding names back in the 1700s, I believe. And Wurzel means root in German, which I think it was my father's grandfather or great-grandfather was a potato farmer. So
oh, wow.
that was interesting. And, I don't know whether it's true that they gave potatoes to Kaiser's army, but that's what my father said. And what I loved, there's so many things I did love about your book, Anne, but your support that your family gave you, I think was wonderful, that you had support in wanting to get the Austrian citizenship, but also discovering your roots, your history, because not everyone has that, where people want to discuss. My first cousin, she wanted to know about our grandparents. So she asked the relatives that were still alive. They didn't want to talk to her. They didn't want to talk about what happened. My mother's parents, they were kicked off their land for being Jewish. It was before World War I, and they fled during World War I, which I thought they came over after World War I. So my grandmother did tell me some stories, but my cousin told me even more stories. So did you get conflicting stories? Did people want to go into depth with you about what they knew? Excuse me.
Oh no, you're fine. It's interesting because there are a lot of questions that nobody ever asked. So at this point, my mother and my aunt are both fortunately still alive. A lot of the research was about the generation above them. It was about their father. It was about their great aunts. It was about their grandmother. And so one of the first things I asked was, I'm finding these things, from Ancestry, from Genie, from, these different archives, that are kind of different from the stories that, we've talked about since I was a kid. Do you know anything about this? And they were both like, oh, well, we never asked. It wasn't anything that we ever talked about, with them, and we were all very focused on, our lives and what was going on. We didn't ask these kinds of questions about the past, about Europe, about, the 20s and 30s. It was just something that was never really a part of their conversation growing up. And I was like, well, that is interesting, because it made me really start to think about the types of stories that we tell and the types of stories that we pass down, and maybe the reasons that we choose to pass down certain stories and then not talk about other stories. And then you start to have these really interesting conversations, right, with your extended family and your cousins and your mom and your aunt and everybody, because you're really starting to think about your own family in a different kind of way. And I feel like if we don't have these conversations, if we don't have like a reason to have these conversations, or there's not somebody who's interested or not somebody who's doing this kind of research and trying to fill the gaps and trying to make sense of things, a lot of the time these conversations just don't happen because they are they can be, many times they are kind of disruptive to, our notions of who we are, our notions of what our families are like, where people came from, why they left, all these different pieces. And there's one version of the story that I really do think people who are the immigrants themselves, who are more directly related to those circumstances, that they tell because it helps them, move forward with their lives. But then, 2 generations down the line, you get a busybody like me in there who's like, well, here's what I'm finding. And that's not what the story that I grew up with. And I kind of just want to, like what is it? Like, what's the expression? I'm totally blanking. Like, I just want it to make sense, right? Like, I just wanted to to have this version of the story, because they're all stories, right? And everybody's truth, even if they've all experienced the same thing, like their version of what happened, their version of the truth, like they're all going to be slightly different, and that's totally fine, and we all know
True.
that. But then there are things that are very large gaps, and you're like, okay, well, why did they tell this version of what happened versus like what I'm finding actually happened? And I think, ultimately those kinds of conversations, like they bring a family together, or they can bring a family together if people are open about it and they're open to the possibilities. It's not like a good thing or a bad thing. And I'm not saying, oh, so-and-so was like they were wrong to tell the story a certain way. It's just the way that they felt like they needed to tell it. And now I'm finding out other things, so I want to understand it from another angle.
Yes, that is very true, because my grandmother told me some stories, how they faked having a disease so they wouldn't get attacked by the soldiers, that she worked as a maid in Romania for a year. Interesting, no one talked about their experiences on the ship. Nobody.
Oh,
so I really wonder what happened on that ship that no one wants to talk about it. I'm sure that it was probably terrible, but my cousin told me that, my grandmother, my grandfather were first cousins, and my grandfather left his family when he was 15 and to run with my grandmother, which was his first cousin, to the States. And it's such a love story. I wish I was a writer, because it would make a wonderful novel. But I think that, like, I didn't know that they hid in graveyards. I didn't know that my grandmother saw someone smother her baby so they wouldn't be found, or that the younger two, because there was a family of, it was my great-grandparents, right, and they had 6 kids at the time. So they were running with 6 kids, and how the 2 boys were locked in the basement, hiding in basements. And they were the nicest people. You would never know they suffered such atrocities, because they were so kind and so loving and so generous. And so you wouldn't know. And then I told you before the interview, but I'll tell the audience, I was told that my father's parents were born in America. They weren't. They came over as children from Poland. Why I was told different, I don't know. I only knew that from Jewish genealogy. And they brought up the records, and I was stunned. I was really stunned. Did you find anything exceptionally stunning, like to think, wow, why was this kept a secret?
So there was a very large extended family. My great-grandfather was one of 8. My great-grandmother was one of 6. And they were all from, what's now Slovakia. Back then it was all part of the, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which had been an empire for like 600 years or whatever at that point. And as my great-grandparents got married, they moved around to different towns within what's now Slovakia and the Czech Republic. And then eventually they made their way to Vienna, where they moved there in 1908. So it was about 6 years before World War I started. And at that point, it was fine. Right? People moved around for work and opportunities the way that, people move around in the U.S. all the time for work and opportunity. And most of their extended family stayed, where they were from, or in the kind of market towns along the way where they had family networks. And so, after World War I, when all of these countries were split up, into however many countries it was, like 6 or 7 countries, they were the only members of their kind of immediate family network in Vienna, from what I understand. And everybody else was still pretty much in what was then Czechoslovakia. And, so life goes on, over the course of the 20s, they would go back and forth, they'd visit, they'd keep in touch, all that. And then, making a long story very short, basically, my great grandmother, and my grandfather and his 3 siblings, by the time World War II began, they were all in the U.S. My great grandmother was the last one to be able to get out in 1938, and that was very, very, very lucky. But this entire extended family, all of her siblings, all of her nieces and nephews, they were still in Czechoslovakia. And and this was some of the things that when you asked before about the things that nobody talked about. Nobody talked about this huge extended family, and so there were pictures of these people in this box, and I was trying to find them. I was trying to figure out what happened to them. And I was able to find the records for one of them, for one of the names. And he was deported from what was then, part of like Czechoslovakia in 1939 was already, had been taken, subsumed, annexed into the Nazi regime, into the Third Reich and all that. And so once they invaded Poland, and once Poland kind of became this grounds for them, for the Nazi regime to sort of start to deport people, start to get Jews out of the places where they wanted to, bring in their supporters and just get the Jews out of there. This cousin, he was on one of the first deportation trains out, and at that point, the extermination camps weren't a thing yet. This was 2-3 years before all of that really ramped up. But even knowing that, he was 17-year-old cousin, his name was Hans Fischer, and he was the only name I was able to trace, and he was deported, and then he just disappeared from what I was able to find. I mean, that stops you, right? That really stops you in your tracks, and you're like, why did nobody talk about this? Because, and I think that this is also why it was so hard for me to wrap my head around this, because my family never passed on this idea that we were victims, that they were victims of the Holocaust, that we were victims of World War II, that I'm descended from somebody who was a victim of World War II, because, for a lot of people, myself included, you grow up thinking the victims are the ones who are in the camps. The victims are the ones who were murdered. And you don't think of basically everybody involved in one way or another actually being a victim. But that's really what it was. I mean, World War II just destroyed worlds and these societies that still haven't fully bounced back. And thinking about things in that way, is very, very different. And when you realize that there was this, these cousins and siblings and people that, my great grandmother grew up with and really loved, and then you just stop talking about them at a certain point. That's a hard thing to understand, and it's a hard thing to really wrap your head around. So that was hard. That was really hard.
Yeah, it really is shocking. I was stunned. My cousin told me that my grandfather, my mother's side, his 2 sisters were in labor camps. Can't pronounce the name of the country. Kyrgyzstan? Is there a Kyrgyzstan? Something.
Yeah, somewhere it used to be part of the Soviet Union, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, and he had to pay for their caskets. He had to pay.
Wow.
I didn't know that, and I think and that as far as like think of my own family, they just wanted to move on. You know, they wanted to assimilate. They wanted to be, Americanized, and
Yeah.
they really wanted a better, life, of course, for their children. I always say that I'm a byproduct of illegals because my mother's parents came in illegally through Canada, but my grandfather became a citizen. My grandmother couldn't because she was a caregiver for her mom, and my grandfather said, "No, you have to take care of your mom." So even though she had other siblings, she was the one who couldn't go to school, and they were very successful. They all had businesses. They lived, close together. And I love the pictures in your book, too. And I was looking at your pictures, and I'm reading how you, went through this box of pictures. It took me back to when I used to go to my grandmother's, and I used to take out her box of pictures and wanted to know, who are these people? What's their story? So I found that just fascinating in your book. What did your parents think of when you said you wanted to apply for the Austrian citizenship?
I think there was a little kind of, a little bit of head scratching there, a little bit of like, why, like what, why? But to me, it was, especially after learning the history and the family, what I could find out about the family story, it was even more important for me to do it, because I think that if, a country is going to open their door and say, we recognize that we really messed this up. We recognize that, our country, didn't protect its citizens, didn't protect its people from persecution. We recognize that we were actively involved in persecuting them, and we can't make that better, but we can offer a way to at least have, some reconciliation and open conversations in a different way. I think that that's incredibly important, and it's something that I can, very honestly say it feels very different than other kinds of experiences I've had internationally. Like, I've worked internationally for a lot of my career, and you see all of these examples around the world still, unfortunately, around conflict and economic migration and people who don't have the opportunities that they wish that they had where they were from. And it's something that, if in the case of my grandfather's generation, where he was from, it didn't support him, and it wasn't a place where he would have been able to thrive, and he recognized that, and he was very lucky to be able to leave. And so to kind of have this chance of not just reconciliation, but also being able to continue to remind a country of, and Austria is a very small country in Central Europe that's very wealthy now, and it's a very successful country in many ways. But to be able to remind them and say, no, this is a piece of your history too, and don't forget it. It's, people like me are important, and my grandfather would have been important if you had let him be a part of your society, and just that message of in a way what the U.S. has done for many years, just inclusion and giving people a chance and letting them, giving them a fairly long leash to be able to try and to be able to live lives that they're proud of without of course, like every single place has its own versions of discrimination and its own versions of, social class and hierarchies and all that, but at least let people try and give people a chance. And I think it's very important. If Austria is going to open the door, I'm happy to walk in and say, you know what, like, you open the door, I'm here, and what are you going to do with me?
Yeah, that was, I think I have to say I tip my hat off to Austria. It took them, this long, but at least they are trying. They're opening up the door for citizenship, so I tip my hat to them and saying, kudos to Austria. I don't think any other country's done that, have they, Anne? Opened up citizenship to those who were stripped? Hello? Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Hello?
Hi, Ann. Can you hear me? Oh, we got disconnected there, folks, but Ann will be back shortly, and we are talking about her book, Austrian Again, Reclaiming a Lost Legacy. This book is very, very interesting. It details how Anne, the work that she had to do, the paper she had to fill out to receive Austrian citizenship. It is really an incredible story. And if you are listening and you are in a book club, I highly recommend this book. Oh, there she is. Hi, Anne.
Hi, Betsy. I'm not sure what happened there. Did I get cut off?
Yeah, I heard you, but you didn't hear me, and then then you were gone. But,
no. Okay, I'm sorry about that.
Oh, that's okay. That's why I told you if I would get disconnected, just call back. It happens every once in a while, but I'm a good ad-libber. But what I was saying was I tip my hat to Austria for doing that, for opening up citizenship to those who were deprived of it, and the future generations where you could receive that citizenship. Is that the only country that is doing that, Anne? To make some kind of restitution?
Germany's had a similar program for much longer. Germany's had a program like this since, I forget if it's the 1940s or 1950s, but Germany's for many years was much more restrictive. Austria's is much more open and liberal. I mean, they basically have 3 qualifying criteria. The first one is that you pick your ancestor. They call it a persecuted ancestor for the purposes of this process. And so you pick your ancestor that fits these 3 criteria. And the first one is that they were a citizen of Austria or one of the successor states of the Austrian Empire, or they were stateless.
Anne, are you on headphones?
No,
are you on headphones?
No, I'm not.
Okay.
Yeah?
Yeah, because I was, I heard you. I was afraid you were going to get dropped again. But go ahead. I could hear you. Sorry.
Okay. So should I start with the first one again?
Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. So the first, so you basically pick your ancestor. You pick the person who they call a persecuted ancestor that qualifies you for the citizenship path. And there's three things that the persecuted ancestor needs. So the first one is that they had to be a citizen of Austria, one of the successor states of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, or they had to be stateless. The second one is they had to have their permanent address, their primary residence, within the borders of modern-day Austria, so the country with today's borders. And the third one is that they have to have been persecuted by the Nazi or Austro-fascist regimes. And so, there's certain historical evidence that you might need for example, in my case, my family's Jewish. My great-grandmother was forced to leave in 1938, so that was a very straightforward case. And so if the dates are a little different or the circumstances are a little different, you might need some more evidence. But that's really all Austria asks for this case.
How you had to fill out a lot of paperwork. How long did it take you to do all that and the research for your book?
So the research process took about 6 months, but it wasn't all at once, and some of it was, just it took time to get some of the documents that we needed, especially, old marriage licenses and birth certificates and death certificates and things like that. And then it took about another 7 months after we submitted the paperwork until, we got our approval. So, and 7 months, for something like this is really not very long. It's a relatively quick process for what this kind of process normally takes. Like I've heard that the German process can take, 3 to 5 years. So 7 months is pretty fast.
Yeah, that's not bad at all.
No, it was much faster than I was expecting.
Yeah, that's pretty quick. So you went to Austria once, right? When you were in college, if I remember from reading.
Yeah, just once, like right after college, and it was, Vienna's beautiful, and we did kind of the normal touristy things around downtown, and we went to the old castle, we went to the cathedral, we went to the opera house. We did all the stuff that you do on as just a regular tourist. But I'm looking forward to going back now with a very different perspective. I'll be there next March. There's going to be a book event at the Vienna Jewish Museum that I'm very excited about.
Oh, that is awesome. I see on LinkedIn that you are, all over, and your book is being very well received. And I'm sure, like in the Jewish community, they want to hear your story. They want to hear about this. How does that affect you, Anne, personally, to know that you have this story and you're sharing it with literally, thousands of people? That's phenomenal.
It's very humbling, Betsy. Like that, at the end of the day, it's very humbling and very touching that people are interested. And I think they're interested for the same reasons that I started to write the book in the first place. They're going through something like this, and they've never, they don't know how to talk about it. They don't feel like there's a sort of just a place where they can go and find other people who are kind of going to understand how weird a lot of this is, and how it brings up all these feelings, and how you learn to think about yourself and your family in a very different kind of way. And it's very touching, and it's very humbling. I'll give you an example. I've got an event next week with the Austrian Embassy in Washington. And at the beginning, they were like, oh, this is great. This is something that we're fully supportive of. And when we have book events, there's usually about 25 people who come. And I'm like, great, like those 25 people are going to be interested, and it's going to be wonderful. And when they, started to circulate information about the event and the registration link and all that, they got something like 200 RSVPs in like 12 hours. Like not even, we're talking about like, something like there's real interest. And I think what this book taps into is just the fact that nobody's writing about this before. Like this is the first book like this that exists, to my knowledge. And people, there are a lot of people who are somewhere in a process. There are people who are curious about it. There are people who want to know more about their families, regardless of sort of if there is an end goal, or just to know more about them. And so this allows people to come together and think about their heritage and talk about their families. And that's really important.
Yes, it is. And genealogy, and knowing your history is really important. Now, my husband was not Jewish, but he loved the Jewish people. And my son knows he's Jewish, and he knows his history because I told him. Matter of fact, we went to see the movie Nuremberg Saturday.
Oh,
and
wow.
Yeah, that was good. And not that I'm promoting the movie during your time, Ann, but I'm making a point here. And in the film, they show the actual films of the concentration camps, and all the bodies. And I said to my son, I said, Josh, I had to watch films like that when I was 8, 9, 10 years old. We were shown films. It gave me nightmares for days, Ann. For days, I would have nightmares. I'm a sensitive person. And it's something that you just don't forget. And my dad, he was very, he experienced anti-Semitism in his neighborhood. He grew up in Newark and Hillside, New Jersey. My mom didn't experience anti-Semitism. She was brought up in the Bronx and Harlem until she moved to New Jersey. I experienced anti-Semitism. And since anti-Semitism is on the rise, I think your book is very important now. I mean, I think it's a perfect time. Not that you could have planned it that way, but I just think it's touching home to so many families. And you don't have to be Jewish to enjoy this book because we're all come from immigrants. And it's a very moving, touching story. Excuse me, my coughing. That everyone can relate to. I remember, just to share a little side note story, there was a couple in the Jewish Community Center. They were German. They were in the concentration camps. And when you're young, you think that, over 30 or 40 is really old. Well, I thought they were really old. I thought they kept to themselves. I thought they were really old because they looked it. Well, having been what they went through, of course. And they had one daughter, and she died young. So I wonder if she was in her 40s, probably from what they were exposed to at the camps. How can you be healthy after what they've experienced? But I always felt sorry for Sonia because she had no family. She didn't have a cousin, an aunt, uncle, or grandparents. And I thought that was sad because of the Holocaust. And, it just doesn't affect that generation, but other generations coming up. It has affected, people. But I just really, I was thinking, wow, I have a lot in common with Ann in reading this book. Tell us about your grandfather, Max Wald.
Yeah, so my grandfather, he was, one of those wonderful people that, just really lit up a room. He immigrated to the U.S. from Vienna when he arrived when he was 20, excuse me. Even back then in the 1920s, by the time he immigrated, there were already, more visas and more issues to actually get into the country. So it took him a while. He left when he was 18. He got to the U.S. when he was 20. And, he really built his life here. He was a master cabinet maker. He worked, building furniture. Excuse me. Now I have a cough too. Oh, gosh.
That's okay.
He worked building furniture for his whole career. And he built a wonderful life here, where he was able to be creative and be himself and be a very full version of himself that I think that all of us would strive for and would really want to do, right? Like that's what we all want, right? We all want to build our lives where we feel like we're valued, we feel like we're doing good work, we want to build our families so that people feel loved and supported. And he was just the kind of person who did that, and really made it seem effortless. And he got here, about 10 years before things really went really, really bad in Europe. But we were very lucky, right? Like my family's very lucky that we've sought out these opportunities, and we've been able to, not everything is like, a fairy tale, right? Like we're not
right.
there living in our penthouse on Fifth Avenue. Like nobody's super wealthy or anything like that, but people have good lives, and people work hard, and we do our best. And I think that, my grandfather is really the one who really drove that home in so many ways, just based on how he lived his life and how he treated people.
I can't even imagine, Anne, being, like my grandparents, 14, 15 years old, or like your grandfather, 18, and just leaving the life that you knew, leaving everything, and just going to a strange land, a strange country with, you don't even know, I didn't know if they knew what they were going to do. It was, back then you had to have someone sponsor you. And it's just fascinating how they just didn't let their horrible experiences affect them from living a full life. And that's, to me, that just really impresses me.
Yeah, I find it so inspiring.
Yes,
I find it
inspiring.
So inspiring, because if they were able to do that, and in the end, succeed despite things being really difficult, despite not growing up speaking the language, not having kind of the family resources that now we have. If they could do that, my problems don't always seem like that big a deal.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, especially like your teen years, right? Can you just imagine fleeing the U.S. as a teenager? And, I mean, I just can't even picture that. And it always seemed to amaze me, Anne, that, the Jews were never accepted in Europe, even though they lived there, even though they contributed to society. They were not considered like Austrian or Polish or German. They were Jewish. And that always fascinated me as to why they were not considered from the country that they lived in, contributed to, even served in the country. A lot of Jews fought in World War I. Mm-hmm. And, of course, when, Hitler came in, they were stripped of whatever, medals. And I do believe that Hitler blamed the Jews for losing World War I. But it's just incredible, to build a life. I'm curious, did your grandfather speak Yiddish?
No, he spoke German. The Yiddish was not spoken by that branch of my family. They were very much German speakers at home.
Oh, interesting. My mother's parents, they spoke Yiddish. And when they didn't want us to know what they were saying, they would speak Yiddish. And my mother never spoke it except some words or phrases. And I would ask her, how do you understand your mother? And how come you're not speaking to her back in Yiddish? She never did. But she, knew what she was saying. I just thought it was amazing that
that's fascinating.
that she didn't speak it, because I worked in a preschool that was predominantly Asian, Indian. And they spoke their language from birth. They figured they would learn English in school. And so I would see, these kids answering their parents in their language. And I would say to my mother, how come you never spoke Yiddish to your mom? She said she answered in English. So I thought that was interesting. They wanted to, I guess, assimilate Some children, though, my mother had some friends that didn't speak English until they went to school. They spoke Yiddish at home.
Mhm.
And they, wanted them to learn it, I guess, at school without having an accent. That's how some people feel, let them learn it at school. So they learn it, properly. But I just think it's amazing. And your grandmother was a librarian. Is she responsible for your love of the round word?
I think that for me, libraries have always been a really special place, and they've been a place where I've just always been able to, find interesting things and explore new worlds and everything. And, ever since I can remember, we'd always go to libraries. And I think I was very lucky to grow up that way and to, be allowed that kind of freedom, because I think that, for kids, like you're just curious about everything, and you have to find out ways to quench that curiosity. And for me, books were a very big part of that.
Oh, I love the library. I love to read. I always did. I still do. And as we're wrapping up, what does the title of your book mean to you? Austrian Again, Reclaiming a Lost Legacy. And I love the cover of your book, by the way. Very pretty.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, the cover designer, Christine Van Brie, was really wonderful to work with, and she was fabulous. I love how it came out, too. To me, the cover... both the cover and the title. So for people who haven't seen it yet, the cover has these birds in flight, kind of going up, but not a direct up, like on a pathway, kind of. And the idea is that it's about finding yourself in different ways. So Austrian Again is my family was Austrian. They had to leave. They were forced to leave. And now, we're able to rediscover and reclaim that identity in a way that works now. It's not going to be the same as it was for them, and that's totally fine. And the idea is that, behind the subtitle, Reclaiming a Lost Legacy, it's the same idea, right? Where without this research, without this curiosity, this piece of the family history that is very much intertwined with Austria and that history there, it would have been completely lost. But, the fact that we can take ownership of it now means something very different than it would have at the time, and it would have even, maybe 50 years ago, maybe 30 years ago. And that legacy, at this point we can do with it, whatever we want, but it's important to have it, and it's important to know that, this piece of how our family fits into the world and fits into this very unfortunate and sad period in world history. But at the same time, that doesn't have to be the end. And we can also take this and go somewhere else with it. And hopefully it's to somewhere a lot more positive, a lot more inclusive, and a lot more understanding.
That is awesome. And would you consider writing another book in the future?
I'm not sure. It was a lot of work, but we'll see. We'll see. I mean, maybe. I don't know. We'll see. Maybe we'll see what happens after I go to Vienna and what that adventure is like.
Well, I loved reading your book, folks. I can't recommend this book enough. Austrian Again, Reclaiming a Lost Legacy. Anne Hand, that's ANNEHAND. And where can people purchase this wonderful book?
So it's online at Amazon and Bookshop and Barnes & Noble. So just, go there, type in Austrian Again, it'll pop up. There's not a lot of books that are written about Austria, so it's pretty easy to find.
And how can people get in touch with you?
So I'm on Facebook and Twitter, X, and LinkedIn, and with all of these, I'm also pretty easy to find. I just use my name, like whether there's an underscore or not, or something, or a period, depends on the social media platform. But Yeah, I'm pretty easy to find on all of those, so you can find me there.
Oh, do you have a website for the book?
I don't have a website. I probably should make one, but it was just one of those things that, with everything going on, it was like, oh my gosh, like something else, and I just haven't done it yet.
Oh, okay. Well, I want to thank you for writing this wonderful book. You hit it out of the ballpark, really, a home run for your first book. And I'm not a book critic, but I know a good book when I read one. And it was just, I loved it. I really enjoyed reading this book. So thank you so much for sharing your family's history, for writing this book, and for getting your citizenship in Austria. And your mom also has the citizenship. So that is just phenomenal. And I thank you again. Folks, I'm telling you, a great gift. And if you're a history buff, and even if you're not, you need to read this book. It's very heart-touching. And if anyone's in a book club, I highly recommend this book for a book club. Do you do book clubs, Anne? Would you go into like a Zoom for a book club?
Absolutely. Actually, as soon as we get off chatting right now, I have a book club later this afternoon. So absolutely, 100%.
Oh, awesome.
Happy to zoom into book clubs.
Oh, great. Well, thank you, Anne Hand, for spending time with me. And all the information about Anne Hand will be in the blog that Jeannie White, who's the station manager. She writes the blog and produces the show. And I want to thank Lillian Caldwell, CEO of Pastoral Talk Radio Network, who makes this all possible. And I want to thank Lissa Warren PR, who arranged this interview. And I just thank you all for listening and subscribing. If you don't already subscribe to Chatting with Betsy, it is for free. I'm on Spotify, Spreaker, iHeart, Amazon Music. And you can follow me on Facebook, Betsy E. Wurzel, Wurzel. And as I always say at the end of my show, in a world where you could be anything, please be kind and shine your light bright, because we need it now more than ever before. This is Betsy Wurzel, your host of Chatting with Betsy on Pastoral Talk Radio Network, a subsidiary of Global Media Network, LLC. Bye-bye now.